It's just gone past 1:30 a.m. here in London. You're watching Press TV with me, Saeed Purza, and our continued coverage of the U.S.-Israeli aggression against Iran. It's day 13 since it all began, and all indications are the war has stopped. More accurately, the U.S.-Israeli aggression against Iran has ended. A mass rally in Tehran's Revolution Square celebrating Iran's victory against the Israeli and American regimes. The Israeli Occupation Forces Chief of Staff saying the regime's aggression against Iran hasn't ended, but has entered a new phase, although both Iranian and Israeli airspaces are said to have reopened. F-bombs and real bombs. A very angry Donald Trump expressing extreme frustration with both Iran, but especially with Israel over ceasefire violations. Iran, of course, denies that accusation. The fact remains that it is a fragile truce, especially because you're dealing with Israel, a rogue state that doesn't hesitate to violate ceasefires, as we saw it do in Gaza and Lebanon, with blatant disregard for international law. The IAEA, the Atomic Energy Agency, the agency that Iran accuses of colluding with Israel, is now calling for the resumption of inspections. I thought the Americans had obliterated those 3 nuclear sites. What's there to inspect now? Okay, there's plenty more to add to that intro, but let's stop right there and start the discussion. Joining me to do just that, Sakina Datu, producer and broadcaster, here with me in the studio, and down the line, Caleb Maupin, journalist and political analyst, joining us all the way from the Big Apple, from New York. Thank you both for being here. Let me start with you, Caleb. What do you make of this fragile ceasefire?
Well, as we look at the facts from the perspective here in the United States, I mean, one thing that's clear is that the political establishment, one, doesn't know how to handle this crisis, and 2, is very divided. Donald Trump, after the strikes on Iran, he came out and he said he obliterated Iran's nuclear program. They'll never be able to create a nuclear weapon. They'll never be able to enrich. He just totally got them. He obliterated them. Iranian media had a different version of events, pointed out that, the sites had been evacuated a few days beforehand, and the only parts of the site at Fordow that were damaged were like the entrance tunnel and maybe some of the exits. The entire facility is underneath huge layers of concrete. It wasn't even impacted, and there was no uranium there to begin with. And the New York Times then confirmed that, and now we have a report from the U.S. Department of Defense Intelligence Agency also saying that these strikes that Donald Trump said were so amazing and obliterated the nuclear program, saying that they had absolutely no impact. But yet Donald Trump is sticking with his story, and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli president, is backing him up and echoing these same claims that fly in the face of all of what's been saying, and the political establishment doesn't know what it's doing. Meanwhile, we saw Donald Trump, before he got on his helicopter this morning, using some rather obscene language, I can't say on television, and describing frustration not just with Iran, which is kind of standard in the United States, but also with Israel, saying that the countries don't know what they're doing in rather crass terms I won't repeat here. And it seems like there is just a lack of coherence. There's not a coherent message coming out of our leaders in the West. They don't quite understand how to deal with this. They know, on the one hand, that Israel seems to have a grip over them, and they have to jump up and down and, do backflips to please Israel and make sure that Israel's not upset by their actions. On the other hand, they don't want to have World War III, and they don't want to face bigger consequences from Iran. Iran destroyed a U.S. military base in Qatar, and Iran could strike back with much more lethal force. They're very aware of that. They've seen what's been happening in Israel lately and how Israel's been hit with these missiles. And so the United States is engaged in a performance where it seems like different figures in what we're now referring to as the deep state in America have different agendas and different versions of events, different versions of what they'd like the U.S. public to hear. We now understand that the classified report that members of the U.S. Congress were supposed to receive today about the strikes has been canceled. So the elected officials who have security clearances, who should be reading the classified Pentagon reports about these strikes, won't get them. And it's apparent that there's some fear on the part of the Trump administration of what they might see if they saw the classified information about these reports. This is becoming a political farce. It is good to see that the war is over and missiles are no longer flying and airspace is open. But the American political establishment is confused, running in several different directions, and I wonder what could come next.
I want to talk about that confusion, Caleb, if that's okay. You said what Trump has been saying, using off-color language. His vice president, only 2 days ago, three spokesman Ismail Baghai, who was keen to remind the world of how this aggression began and Iran's fortitude in the face of any Israeli or U.S. transgressions.
Today was the 12th day of Iranians' national defense against an egregious act of aggression by Zionist regime. As you know, Israel started an act of aggression against Iran on 13 June. We know that this aggression was supported, was coordinated with the United States, and then on 22nd June, the United States joined in Israel aggression against Iran by attacking our peaceful nuclear installations. Both of these unlawful attacks are regarded as crimes of aggression, and we are determined to hold them accountable. Today there was a sort of pause in act of aggression against Iran. We have said that we would see their action if there is any violation of these so-called ceasefire. Iran would react harshly. So we are determined in our defense, and we will see what will happen next.
Well, the spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, Ismail Baghai, speaking to Press TV earlier. Caleb, I'm going to quote Mohammad Islami. He's the head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran. He says, "We have already established a third nuclear enrichment site in a secure location, and we will operate it soon, and we will begin enrichment activities at the appropriate time." I mean, you talked about it a little bit at the top, but again, the Americans touting how successful their operation, their strikes were, using the word obliteration in every conversation, in every interview they have done. And yet, look where Iran is. Look where the Iranians are going to restart enriching uranium. If that is not a victory as far as Iran is concerned, I wonder what is.
Well, it's going to be interesting because if Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump want to stick with their claim that they completely obliterated the Iran peaceful nuclear energy program, and Iran won't be able to build an atomic bomb as they alleged Iran was trying to do, how are they going to justify any future aggression, right? Because if their strikes actually did what they're claiming, there's no way Iran could ever be a nuclear threat again. This is going to put them in an odd place because we know that the U.S. hostility to Iran is not going to end after this conflict, obviously. But they're going to have to retract their story about obliterating this nuclear facility in order to justify further aggression. They're painting themselves into a corner. I think about the cartoon, the classic Disney cartoon of Pinocchio, and every time he tells a lie, his nose grows bigger and bigger and bigger. They're telling bigger lies, and it's getting harder to get their story straight, right? I think Mark Twain, the very famous American witicist and commentator, he said, "A man who never tells a lie never has to remember what he said." Well, Donald Trump is going to have to remember what he said, and it's going to be quite difficult. So that's the situation we're in right now. And we're getting different messages from different parts of the political establishment.
Yeah, I was going to throw in another question, which is, okay, the one thing that these strikes didn't do was to, quote-unquote, obliterate those three Iranian nuclear facilities. But one argument is that what these strikes did is that they destabilized the world. The United States and Israel, both nuclear armed, attacking a non-nuclear country, Iran. What it says to other non-nuclear countries around the world is who gets attacked and who doesn't.
Well, sure. Let's remember Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. They were invaded and overthrown. Let's remember that Libya, Gaddafi gave up his weapons of mass destruction and his nuclear program, and they were overthrown by NATO bombs, and the country's been destroyed. But what country has been secure and, despite sanctions and provocative threats, not faced any outright regime change attempts? That's North Korea, that withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And this is a situation where if the United States really wants to uphold the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, they're going to have a hard time doing it, because they're sending a pretty clear message that if you don't have an atomic bomb, we will attack you. And if you do have one, you're safe. I mean, this is pretty outrageous. North Korea and the United States, there were negotiations under the previous Trump administration, and South Korea at this point is looking to continue negotiating with North Korea. But North Korea received a letter from Trump about resuming negotiations, and they completely rebuffed it. Even though Kim Jong-un considered Donald Trump to be a friend, they had quite a good relationship during the last term. I think they looked at the way Iran is being treated, et cetera, and how negotiations with Iran seem to be carried out in bad faith. It looks to me like North Korea doesn't want to negotiate with the United States because they don't consider the United States to be an honest actor. And they've got a nuclear arsenal, and they're safe. So, yeah, the whole thing is a hypocritical situation if there ever was one. Now, Russia has played a very important role here. Now, Russia has offered to play the role of mediator and arrange important deals. And, Russia very much would like to see the conflict in Ukraine end. And Russia is a close friend of Ukraine. A very close friend of Iran, and they have a very close relationship. And so it's been good to see how the Russian leadership and the Russian president has stood up for Iran's right to peaceful nuclear energy, has condemned these strikes, etc. And Iran is part of a whole new world with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with the BRICS. Powerful statement from the BRICS today condemning the attacks. Hearing the BRICS country just give a thunderous condemnation to the United States and Israel. A very powerful thing. The BRICS is the new economy of the world. Iran is very well integrated into the new economic world that is emerging. So the idea that Iran stands alone or it's isolated, that's not reality.
That certainly is.
Iran more. So they hugely miscalculated, I think, on this front.
It's become an inspiration. And Ayatollah Khamenei, as you say, has become something of a social media celebrity, if you will, over the past few days. Sensation, I think, is the right word. And yes, inspiring a lot of people around the world about people suffering. I was talking to my own family members, and I was jokingly telling them that you are now called IDPs, internally displaced people. So it wasn't just military targets.
Absolutely.
People had to leave their homes behind and go to places that they felt they would be safe. Caleb, let me come back to you. Talk about the fact that Israel was not able, despite all the military hardware at its disposal, to impose some kind of a balance of firepower. And we saw the Iranian response, the fact that Iran inflicted such damage to Israel, on Israel, that was unprecedented in the history of the Zionist entity.
Yeah, well, I think one sign that Israel faced a response from Iran that they were not expecting is that we saw a dramatic shift in Zionist propaganda. Generally, the way the Zionists respond to any crisis is to play the victims, right? In any instance, we remember after October 7th and since then, in their narrative, they are the victims. They're the victims of anti-Semitism, that the only reason the Palestinians want to resist them is because deep down they hate Jews, and they're just the victims, and look at our victimhood. That's generally the way Israeli propaganda operates. They are the eternal victims, and so that gives them license to murder and kill because they're just so victims. They're just these poor oppressed victims. We didn't see that in the response during this 12 days of conflict. In fact, we saw Israeli media doing the opposite and trying to belittle and pretend that these strikes didn't impact them, claiming that the number of casualties was very, very low. Why did they all of a sudden shift? Why are they no longer the victims, the eternal victims who then have the right to bomb and murder because they're just suffering so much? Why are they suddenly trying to downplay their victimhood? Well, that's because of the fact that the response that Iran gave was so unprecedented and so unexpected. They're very afraid of emboldening people around the world and people seeing how weak they truly are, that they are not some mighty power. And so they shifted their entire narrative to be one of, oh, this didn't bother us. Well, the whole world saw video. Nowadays people can film things with their phones. We saw what happened to those skyscraper buildings. We saw what the Israelis were running from. We saw the devastation and the rubble. We saw Israel suffering major retaliation for its unprovoked criminal attack that murdered top Iranian generals, murdered Iranian scientists, and that can't be undone. And the fact that they're tap dancing around saying, "Oh, it didn't bother us. We didn't suffer," that shows that it was substantial.
It certainly was substantial, and Sakina.
Countries.
Yeah.
And I think, whereas before people thought, because of all this propaganda we've heard about, the chosen people and how after, what happened with them and, they need a safer place, the Jews want to say, people are now not buying into that anymore. And they are the aggressors. Everybody has seen it. People saw the aggression during the genocide. But what they saw now is that how weak they are, that they can be defeated, that it is possible to get these guys, obliterated. And I think the countdown has started.
And Caleb, the same question to you, basically, and if you can, contrast that with Iran. I mean, you talked about it earlier, I know, but a little deeper perhaps. The Islamic Republic's standing coming out of this war, regionally and internationally, after decades of Iranophobic propaganda peddled by successive American, European, Israeli governments. You mentioned demonizing Iran being standard procedure in the United States administrations and their war-loving media. How do you think Iran has emerged from all this?
Well, it's interesting because we can recall that tweet that Donald Trump made where he referred to how the Islamic Republic, they may not be able to make Iran great again. Well, actually, they have. And I mean, not just recently, I mean, since the 1979 revolution, with his construction jihad mobilized, in the time of the Iraq-Iran war, at the time Iran was facing a foreign invasion, the country was fully electrified. And I've been to Iran and I've seen just the level of development, electrification, telecommunications everywhere, almost universal employment, huge state industries that employ people, a medical service that's available to all citizens, the raising of living standards that the Islamic Republic has carried out is huge, and they did it under quite hostile circumstances, including a foreign invasion for their first decade of existence. But regardless, we know that in more recent years, especially since the Iran nuclear deal of 2015, the strategy of the United States was to polarize the Middle East and polarize the Muslim countries of the world between allies of Iran and allies of Saudi Arabia, and utilize the kind of fanatical Wahhabi ideology of Saudi Arabia against the Shia Islamic revolutionary tradition that governs Iran. And that was the goal. And that entire strategy, which, was carried out under Obama and then continued in Trump's first term when he went to Saudi Arabia and talked about building an Arab NATO, that strategy has completely failed because of Israel, because every Muslim is opposed to what Israel is doing to the Palestinians and their bombardment of Gaza. And Iran and its allies are on the forefront in the battlefield opposing Israel. So no Muslim government, no matter how corrupt the leaders might be, no matter how much they might harbor hostility toward Iran in private, no Muslim government can be pointing fingers at Iran and condemning Iran right now, because Iran is clearly the main opponent of Israel and the main ally of the Palestinians. And Iran has a huge amount of support. And on top of that, in Iranian politics, there's been division. And many had hoped that Rouhani and his administration, the reformists, that they would be able to reach some kind of agreement with the United States. And that didn't play out too well. And we're now seeing that the argument of some of the more, what U.S. media calls the hardliners or the principalists, some of their beliefs that the United States is simply not going to be able to be negotiated with, And some of their argument, they just need to stick true to the anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist and Islamic revolutionary principles that the country was founded on. Their arguments are being very widely heard at this point. When I was in Iran in 2015, I got to attend an event where the supreme leader spoke. And I remember, I guess at the time, there was debate in Iran about whether or not to call the USA the Great Satan. And he said, we do call the United States the Great Satan, but we don't mean the American people. We mean the American system of imperialism, that destroys and bombs countries. He talked about the American system. And I was standing there in the audience, and tears came to my eyes, that my country, America, that's what it means to people all over the world. Killing and murder and death. And I that's a moment that will stick with me for the rest of my life. And it became clear to me that there is a desperate need for an anti-war movement in the United States. We need a bigger peace movement in America. Many people voted for Trump because they thought he would bring peace. He didn't. Many people voted for Obama because they thought he would bring peace. He didn't. We need to build a movement in America. There's an urgent need for a real grassroots mass mobilization for peace in America. My organization, the Center for Political Innovation, is very committed to building that movement and breaking with old orthodoxies in order to get to the American people who do want peace and don't approve of these strikes. Look at the polls. The American people don't agree with what Trump has done. We need to build a movement to make that public opinion count for something.
Correct. And like you said, the Iranians call the United States the Great Satan, but over the years they've been very pragmatic all the way to the very top, and they've entered negotiations with the United States. But do you think, coming out of this war, such negotiations are now dead forever? I mean, that's what the Iranians had in mind. The reason they went into negotiations with the Americans was they were putting Iran first, unlike Mr. Trump, who has proven to have put Israel first ahead of the United States.
Well, Iran made huge concessions in 2015, and as a result of those concessions, things didn't get better, and Qasem Soleimani was ruthlessly murdered, and more sanctions were imposed. And then Donald Trump, it appears, was negotiating with Iran in bad faith while coordinating with Israel and knowing that these attacks were coming. If the United States wants countries to negotiate with them, they need to stick to their word, right? And that's pretty basic. No one's going to negotiate with somebody who they can't trust. And the reason, it's not simply that U.S. leaders are dishonest. The reason is there are different agendas within the halls of power. I think Barack Obama probably wanted to stick to the Iran nuclear deal. He was hoping to boost the reformist wing in Iranian politics and maybe slip in American NGOs and pull off some kind of color revolution. Whereas Donald Trump, who's in with Netanyahu, wants lots of money for weapons contractors, wants Likud and the hardliners in Israel to stay in office, and he had a different strategy. The American elite don't agree with each other enough to stick to their treaties. That's really the issue, is that there is so much disagreement in America, and that gets into economic issues. Look, this Western imperialist financial system, capitalism in its monopoly stage, Atlanticism, globalism, whatever term you want to describe it, this system is in deep crisis for a lot of reasons we don't have time to get into on here. Our elite are fighting with each other. There is struggle among the rich and powerful. They're not just suppressing working people and anti-imperialist folks. They're suppressing each other right now. There's a battle among our elite. They cannot make up their minds, and we're seeing an internal crisis. And this is for all of the West. This is in Britain. This is in France. This is in Germany. This is in Italy. We're seeing this all across the Western countries. The Western system is played out. And so the world for Wall Street, we don't want it to continue. The American people don't want it, and it would be in their interest, as well as the interest of the people of Iran and of the whole world, to see this system gotten rid of.
Correct. And I guess for that to happen, one, you need media that will tell the truth. You need more the likes of democracynow.org. I think Counterpunch, the new news network, I guess that's what it's called, and the likes of those to begin with. And if there's going to be an anti-war movement and a broader tent, as you said, perhaps you can lead it. And if you do, remember, it all started here. All right, thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. So